I'm Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up right now on Almanac North. We'll hear from Minnesota Senator Tina Smith about the impeachment of President Donald Trump and what happens next. Duluth Mayor Emily Larson shares her thoughts on moving forward in a politically divided country. And Duluth Human Rights Officer Karl Crawford joins us to talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King and efforts to end racism. These stories and voices of the region coming up on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Dennis Anderson. Julie is off this week. Our show was recorded live Friday at 5:30 p.m. The Minnesota Department of Health has announced a change in federal guidance in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in the state. Adults aged 65 and older are now eligible for vaccination as the state works to stop the pandemic. Health officials want to see all available doses of vaccine used as quickly as possible, but say they are waiting for the feds to step up and provide more doses to the state. The Soo Locks at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan close at midnight tonight, bringing an end to the Great Lakes shipping season. The locks are closed each winter by the Army Corps of Engineers to perform maintenance on the vitally important infrastructure. The 2021 shipping season will kick off on March the 25th when the locks reopen to Great Lakes traffic. Brighton Beach is in the midst of a 2-week closure as crews begin clearing the area for trail construction this spring. The park has been closed to vehicle traffic and the parking lot is also closed. Heavy equipment is moving in and out of the park, which is expected to reopen to traffic on January the 25th. A collaboration between North Shore Bank and One Roof Community Housing has landed a $1 million grant for an affordable apartment building. The 52-unit Brewery Creek Apartments will be built on the corner of 6th Avenue East and 4th Street in Duluth. 26 units in the building will be specified for homeless youth, with another 10 units dedicated to housing Fond du Lac tribal members. History was made this week when the United States House of Representatives voted to impeach President Donald Trump, the first time a president has ever been impeached twice. The single charge brought against Trump was for incitement of insurrection for a speech he gave to supporters before they stormed the U.S. Capitol last week. Next, the U.S. Senate will hold a trial on the charge, which could start around the time Joe Biden takes office next week. Almanac North producer Greg Grell spoke with Minnesota Senator Tina Smith this morning about the House vote to impeach President Trump.
I want to note that it was a bipartisan vote. We had a violent attack on our United States Capitol and our democracy, and it was incited by the President of the United States. And there have to be consequences for that. We have to make sure that this president doesn't do more damage to our democracy and to public safety and to national security. Impeachment will now come to the United States Senate, where the Senate will consider whether to convict him. I will vote to convict. I think that this is a clear example of an abuse of power and a grave danger to our country. When the trial happens is frankly really up in the air. And as I speak, it's not clear exactly how that will unfold. But the important thing, I think, is that the Senate will need to consider this impeachment. We have no choice but to do that. And we also have some really important work to do moving forward quickly with helping to confirm the new Biden nominees, especially the nominees, to my mind, in national security and safety. And then also moving forward with what is a big and bold agenda for helping this country recover from COVID.
Now, with President Biden due to take office in just days, why is it important, do you think, that President Trump still be held accountable for the violence in Washington?
Well, I think there are a few reasons for that. One, I think that he is still a danger to our country. And in some ways, I believe that this looming impeachment is helping to dissuade him from doing other things that would continue to be very dangerous for our country and for public safety and for national security. But also, one of the things that can happen in an impeachment trial is that the Senate can decide that this president should never hold office again. To me, that is very important. And that would be part of what work we would do, even if, and as it appears, we'll be considering his impeachment after he's no longer in office.
Well, as you know, some people say that this is a time to bring the country together and that the impeachment trial won't do that, that it won't help unify the country. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that is that our democracy is built on the fundamental idea of accountability. And to have a mob of people, including white nationalists and people carrying the Confederate flag, to have them storm the Capitol at the encouragement of the president and to have no accountability for that, I don't think that that is a unifying message for our country. I think we need to come together. We need to tell the truth about what has happened here. And we need to have accountability be at the root of that. Some of my colleagues are calling for unity, but they can't even say the words that they believe that this was a free and fair election and that Vice President Biden will be president and he should be president. In fact, this president hasn't even fully conceded that he lost this election. He's still saying that it was stolen from him. So the path towards unity is to acknowledge the truth of where we are and to hold those accountable who created this violence, and then to build on that for healing.
Does such a shocking moment like this in our nation's history provide an opportunity perhaps to start bridging that partisan divide that we have in our country?
Well, it is such a great point. I think that Americans are Americans first, not Democrats or Republicans. And I've not yet talked to a single person who saw this violent attack on our Capitol and wasn't appalled. It was really defiling that home of our democracy. That should be kind of a reminder to us about what holds us together. And I can even see amongst my colleagues in the Senate, where bipartisanship has always been a hallmark of the work that I've done there, a recognition that we need to pull together. And we can do that at the same time that we have accountability. And that's what I think is called for in this moment. But, you know, sometimes the greatest progress in this country have come out of the greatest crisis. We saw that in the Civil War. We saw that during the Great Depression. We saw that in the 1960s. And we need to see that again as we move into 2021 with the COVID pandemic, with issues of racial injustice, and of course now this direct attack on our country.
Now, by this time next week, we'll have a new president, President Joe Biden. What do you expect to see in the early days of the Biden administration? What can you expect?
Well, can I tell you that over the last week, I have been having conversations with many of Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden's nominees, and it fills me with enthusiasm and excitement for what we're going to be able to do together. I just finished speaking with Javier Becerra, who is going to be the head of Health and Human Services, Deb Haaland to be head of Interior, Vivek Murthy is going to be Surgeon General. These are individuals that have so much energy for moving our country forward, and I think you can see that in the big proposals that Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden laid out just yesterday for how we respond to COVID. Very focused on how this is so deeply challenging to Americans, people who've lost their jobs, who don't have access to healthcare anymore, who've lost access to childcare. I mean, we see these challenges front and center in the lives of people living in the North Country of Minnesota. And I'm excited to think that we're going to be able to have a response that meets the scale of the need here in Minnesota and around the country.
Well, Senator Tina Smith, Democrat from Minnesota, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. Take care, everyone.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz visited Duluth this week as part of a civility tour in the wake of the unrest at the Capitol. Greg Grell spoke with Duluth Mayor Emily Larson today about her thoughts on the riot and what the governor said.
He really spoke from the heart as both a leader, but as a history teacher. And really, for him, the message was, We have come through really difficult conflicts in the past. We have a history as a country of, fighting and having a hard time and struggling, and we can't get through where we're supposed to go. It's hard to move forward until you know where you've been.
Now, you spoke to the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce this week about the difficult 2020 that we've just experienced. What was your message to the business community?
Well, it was kind of twofold, actually. To be honest, it was a hard talk to get ready for because I want to be glass half full, which I am all the time, and glass overfilling. And yet it's a really hard time. It is, we can't be Pollyannish about it. We can't pretend people aren't struggling. We can't pretend people aren't laying people off or worried about their business. And so really what I spoke to was just this intersection that we are still in of the last year and then this year, and the realities of what that is for everybody. And it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking what we're seeing our neighbors work with, what our own families are working with. And so I really spoke to this idea of breaking, recognizing the heartbreak, but letting your heart kind of break open. And to, again, be forgiving of yourself and others as we navigate what comes next. Maybe this idea that we don't jump to, anger and division immediately. We should always be fair and accountable and all of those things. We don't ignore what we need to be doing, but that we actually have an appreciation for how truly difficult this time period is. And this idea that, for me anyway, if we look over the past year, it feels like one long disaster or trauma. And I don't think we've given ourselves enough credit for literally just surviving it this long.
Now, next week, of course, we're going to have a new president inaugurated, and there's been some warnings about potential demonstrations at state capitals, at the U.S. Capitol. Have you any concerns at all about any kind of demonstrations that could happen here locally?
So right now, as of today, and we're recording this on Thursday, I don't, or we're actually recording it on Friday.
Right.
See, it's hard to even know what day it is, Greg. I don't. And I do want to assure people that I really thank you for reaching out, because many people have reached out to ask, are we safe? Whether it's very specific questions about City Hall or just in general. I really feel comfortable with the research that we're doing, with the relationships that we have that help inform us in terms of our public safety strategies. And so we really do staff this kind of area very specifically all the time. We literally have staff, and all they do is monitor. They find, whether and it's using a multitude of tools. So really want to assure people that based on today, right now, I'm feeling like our community is very safe as we move into this transition.
Duluth Mayor Emily Larson, thanks very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. Great to see you.
This Monday, January the 18th, will mark Minnesota's 35th annual celebration of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Events of the past year show that we still have a long way to go when it comes to race relations in our country. Here to talk about the importance of honoring Dr. King is Karl Crawford, Duluth's Human Rights Officer. Welcome, Karl. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here on Almanac tonight. We all know that the pandemic has certainly changed everything, and it'll probably change how we celebrate Dr. King Day on Monday. But nonetheless, what is planned? Because some things will continue.
That's correct, Denny, and I'm happy to be here this evening and share that the programs will go on, even though they're going to be virtual this year. There will be an event at 11 o'clock that would be streamlined, as well as one starting at 11:30 here locally in Duluth.
Mm-hmm. What's the message all races should glean from Dr. King?
The message of love. It's a never-ending message. Love thy neighbor, love thyself, and more importantly, love your community.
Why is that so hard to grasp, do you think?
Given this past year of being a divided country, divided community, it's really time for us to stop hand-wringing and come together and really build toward that beloved community that Dr. King so eloquently spoke of.
35 years now of celebrating Dr. King with Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Are we making progress, Karl?
I believe we are. When you look at the tumultuous summer that we had, the marches that had speared all over the country, we are making great efforts and great strides of coming together. And I see that in the eyes of our youth as well as the lessons learned from our elders.
We're not born with racial bias. What causes that?
Racism is taught. And it's something that I truly believe if it's taught, it can be untaught and unlearned. And that energy can go in a different direction. And that relies on all of us to make that happen.
Karl, what's the job of Duluth Human Rights Officer? What do you do?
One of my key jobs is to make sure that racism and discrimination does not find a foothold here in Duluth. And we're working very hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. But it takes all of our guests to also be the eyes and ears to make sure that that doesn't happen in our community.
So then how does your office process those claims of racial discrimination?
Well, we do have complaints that come into my office directly as well as online. And this goes back to the old saying, if you see something, say something. And let's work together to make sure that racism does not find a foothold here.
What laws exist, either statewide or local ordinances, to help you in your job?
Well, there are many, but the most important right now is the Human Rights Ordinance here in our community that helps guide the work of the commission and myself as a human rights officer.
So in a year's time, pick up a dozen or more complaints, or how?
Yes, but also know that I lean a lot on community organizations that also bring us to the table to have dialogue and talk about ways we can get together.
Do you find multiple races have biases? Whites have biases, blacks have biases?
Oh, Denny, we all have biases, and it's key that we understand that and recognize that within ourselves. I have a good friend that does this work, and she says when you wash your face and brush your teeth, check your bias. Check and see what are the things you've heard or read that is changing the way you're seeing people today, and be willing to make that change.
Have you discovered it's hard to change? It takes work?
It takes work, but the work is simple once you get started. The start is the key of us moving together and walking together.
What is Martin Luther King's legacy, Karl?
It's an amazing legacy, one that hasn't been met yet. He often said, you know, you're going to get there before I do. I may not get there with you. But it's a message of love and hope. We need that message more today than ever.
All right, Karl Crawford, Duluth Human Rights Officer. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, all the best. It's time now for Voices of the Region. Each week we hear from a journalist in our broadcast area and the stories they are reporting. This week our journalist is Marshall Helmberger, the publisher of the Timberjay newspaper based in Tower, Minnesota.
Last summer, we had two candidates who filed for Ely Mayor, Chuck Novak, who's been the incumbent for the last, at least 8 years. And he had a competitor in Eric Urbis, but shortly after Mr. Urbis filed, he pulled his name and said he was not interested. He had health concerns, so he backed out. So I think Chuck Novak assumed that, you know, he had another easy coast to re-election here. But it turned out that Mr. Urbis had withdrawn from the race too late to get off the ballot. So his name still did appear on the ballot. And when folks went to vote, oddly enough, despite the fact he did not campaign and made it clear he was not interested in the job, he ended up getting the most votes by about 125 vote margins. As our editor in Ely quipped, he said, this guy's got more comebacks than George Foreman, because this was actually, Novak has lost a re-election 3 times now, but in every time he manages to come back and end up as mayor. So who knows? He may still have many more stories to tell here, I think. Some of the language that was tucked into that COVID relief package, which was passed in December, And there was pretty wide ranging. Obviously, it was a huge bill, thousands of pages, and it turns out there was a tax incentive that was embedded in that bill, which provided a 26% tax credit for anybody purchasing and installing a new wood furnace. Now, these are furnaces, not like a wood stove. These are furnaces that are designed to sit in your basement. They would tie into your forced air system, and and provide heat for an entire home. And locally we have Lampa Manufacturing here in Tower, which is the only company in the country that has actually met this strict new emission standard, which went into effect in 2020. And this credit is only companies that have met that standard qualify. So this should be a big boon to Lampa Manufacturing. Minnesota Power has really been out front in terms of addressing the climate change issue and the shift to renewables. I mean, they were the first Minnesota utility to reach 50% renewable energy. They announced that back in December, and they indicate that based on a new integrated resource plan that they plan to introduce to the Public Utilities Commission on February 1st, they are calling for a shift to 70% renewable power by 2030. And then they want to phase out coal entirely as a generating a fuel by 2035, and that's a big deal for a company like Minnesota Power, which used to be pretty heavily dependent on coal. They've really made a remarkable transition, I think, through wind and solar primarily, and then also hydro. I mean, I think that's the other thing. They've had the advantage of being able to develop those contracts with Manitoba Hydro, which is helping them to kind of fill in, those periods where, say, wind and solar resources are a little slack. COVID has really racked a lot of small town newspapers. One of the things that we lost this summer, and it was most noticeable, was all of our event advertising. Almost every weekend in the summer up here, you expect to have, an event, and of course, there's always advertising surrounding that, and sometimes spin-off advertising. So that's what makes our summer busy, really, are all those events. And of course, they all went away. The Blueberry Festival and right on down the line. Some of the biggest festivals we have up here disappeared. And so that certainly had a big impact on the bottom line. And then I think to sort of the icing on the cake was our print plant here not long ago informed us that our print pricing was going to go up a lot. So that was kind of a double whammy. We were a little bit concerned about that, but in the end, we decided to make a change that we'd been considering for a while, which is to go to one edition. For many years, in fact, from the beginning, the Timberjay actually zoned 3 editions. We had a Cook Ore edition, we had a Tower Sedan edition, and then an Ely edition. And they had some local pages in each, but most of it was still a regional publication with some local pages. And now we've decided to go to a single regional edition, which will actually save us money, even though we'll probably be running more pages now, because we're going to be including all of that local news that was otherwise zoned. That'll all go into the regional edition.
Now, finally this week, we bring you the music of a young Iron Range man who's working to make a living through song. He joined forces with a local filmmaker to make a video for his song about the legacy of the miners who formed the backbone of the Iron Range. Here is Steve Solkola and friends performing Iron Ore.
Iron ore, iron ore, iron ore, iron ore. Well, Way back home in Finland before the Russians were beat back, my great-great-granddad dreamed of freedom because home was way out of whack. Then he heard of a land with citizens not subject to the Russian Tsar. No money in his pocket, the man set out onto a journey far. The trek was not an easy one, crossing the big ocean, driven only by Sisu, that secret that lies within. Couldn't settle on the East Coast, gotta stick with what you know. So the landscape of the upper Midwest is where he decided to go. Minnesota had a wind and rain, ice and pain, lots of folks couldn't take it. But he dreamed of opportunities and he knew he had to make it. The place had forests, lakes, loons, and wild rice, but living there was a chore. But his luck did change when he found...
And you can learn more about Steve Solkola and his musical talent next week on WDSC's Making It Up North. Tune in Thursday, January 21st at 7:30 to see his story. Keep up with the latest from Almanac North by following us on social media. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And visit the WDSC website for updates on programming, news about the station, and upcoming events. You can also download the PBS video app for on-demand viewing of your favorite programs. Thanks to our guests and crew here in the studio. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, everyone, and be kind.
Work hard, work long, let wick swing pick, should the ore be found. And sweat blood in darkness that one cannot define. That's an itty-bitty taste of what a miner faced in an underground mine. He didn't care how deep he had to go, he had a family to feed. Now don't you know all the wealth boss man didn't allow? Granddad made it into work somehow. He traded his healthy back for bread. You may be asking what for? For the hard-earned paycheck he would have if he found that iron ore.
Iron ore, iron ore, iron ore, iron ore.
The Vermilion and Cuyuna and a good old...